The studio lights glowed bright across the stage as the audience settled into their seats, excited for another emotional and entertaining episode of Kelly Clarkson's daytime talk show. Producers rushed backstage with clipboards, makeup artists made final touch-ups, and camera operators adjusted their angles for the opening segment. Everything looked perfectly normal from the outside. But behind the curtains, tension had already started building long before the cameras rolled. That afternoon's special guest was Daughtry, the rock star known for his powerful voice and emotional performances. Fans in the audience were thrilled. Some held homemade signs while others whispered excitedly about hearing him perform live. The producers expected a smooth interview filled with music, laughter, and stories from his career. When Chris arrived at the studio earlier that morning, he seemed calm but noticeably serious. He greeted staff politely, shook hands with crew members, and quietly walked to his dressing room. According to people backstage, he had specifically asked for the interview to focus on his new music and recent projects, rather than personal topics. Everyone agreed. At least that's what he believed. Meanwhile, Kelly prepared in her own dressing room, reviewing notes with her producers. The show's team wanted stronger emotional moments for ratings, and one producer reportedly suggested bringing up difficult moments from Chris's past to create a raw television moment. Kelly looked unsure at first, but the staff convinced her the audience wanted honesty and vulnerability. Minutes before filming began, Chris stood backstage, adjusting his jacket while listening to the crowd cheer during Kelly's opening monologue. The applause echoed through the studio halls. A production assistant smiled nervously and told him, "They're excited to see you." Chris nodded politely, though something about the atmosphere already felt uncomfortable to him. As he walked onto the stage, the audience erupted with applause. Kelly greeted him warmly with a hug, and at first, the interview seemed friendly and relaxed. They joked about touring, discussed songwriting, and laughed about life on the road. Chris even shared a funny story about forgetting lyrics during an early performance years ago. The crowd loved every moment, but then the tone suddenly shifted. Kelly glanced down at her cue cards before asking a question that instantly changed Chris's expression. She carefully mentioned painful personal struggles he had experienced in recent years. The audience grew quiet. Chris leaned back slightly, visibly caught off guard. For a second, he forced a polite smile and answered briefly, clearly trying to move the conversation elsewhere. Kelly continued. She brought up another sensitive subject, asking whether those difficult experiences had damaged relationships within his family and career. Several audience members exchanged uncomfortable looks. Chris paused longer this time before responding. His voice remained calm, but the tension in his face became impossible to ignore. "I thought we were focusing on the music today," he quietly said. The studio suddenly felt colder. Kelly attempted to lighten the mood with a quick laugh, but the atmosphere had already changed. One producer near the cameras reportedly signaled for her to keep going. Wanting to maintain control of the segment, Kelly asked another deeply personal question, this time referencing rumors that had circulated online for months. Chris stared at her silently. The audience stopped clapping entirely. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Even the camera operators seemed uncertain whether to continue filming. Chris finally leaned forward and spoke, in a firm voice that echoed across the quiet studio. "I came here to talk about my work, not to relive painful moments for entertainment." The crowd reacted with nervous murmurs. Kelly looked surprised. She tried explaining that she only wanted viewers to connect emotionally with his story, but Chris was no longer comfortable. He shook his head slowly while removing his microphone pack from behind his jacket. Backstage staff immediately realized something serious was happening. One producer rushed toward the stage while another motioned for the cameras to cut to a wider audience shot. Kelly attempted to smooth things over, telling Chris they could move on to another topic. But the damage had already been done. Chris stood up from his chair. The audience gasped softly. He thanked the fans for supporting him over the years, then turned toward Kelly one final time. Though clearly upset, he kept his composure. "There's a difference between honesty and exploitation," he said calmly. Without another word, he walked off the stage. The entire studio fell silent except for the sound of his footsteps disappearing backstage. Audience members looked stunned. Some whispered to each other while others stared toward the curtains where Chris had exited. Moments earlier, Kelly remained seated for a few seconds, visibly shaken. She attempted to continue the show professionally, but the energy in the room had completely changed. Producers quickly moved to an unscheduled commercial break while staff members rushed backstage trying to convince Chris to return. Inside the hallway behind the stage, tensions exploded. According to crew members, several producers argued over who approved the controversial questions. One blamed the writing staff, while another insisted Kelly had agreed to everything beforehand. Chris reportedly stood near his dressing room, surrounded by members of his team, clearly frustrated but refusing to yell or create further drama. He felt blindsided, one insider later claimed. Kelly eventually walked backstage herself, hoping to personally apologize. Witnesses said the conversation remained private but emotional. Chris listened respectfully while Kelly explained that the questions were never intended to hurt him. However, he reportedly replied that public interviews should never cross personal boundaries without consent. After several minutes, Chris quietly gathered his belongings and left the studio through a side exit. Outside the building, a small crowd of fans waiting near. The entrance noticed him walking quickly toward a black SUV. Despite the situation, he still paused briefly to wave at supporters, before getting into the vehicle and leaving. Meanwhile, inside the studio, producers scrambled to reorganize the remainder of the episode. Audience members were instructed not to record or post backstage details online, though rumors began spreading almost immediately across social media. Within hours, clips from the tense interview exploded online. Fans quickly took sides. Some defended Kelly, arguing that emotional interviews are common on daytime television. Others strongly supported Chris, praising him for standing up for himself and refusing to let painful experiences become entertainment. Social media platforms flooded with debates, reaction videos, and fan theories. Hashtags connected to both celebrities began trending nationwide by evening. The next morning, entertainment reporters everywhere discussed the shocking walk-off. Some called it one of the most uncomfortable moments in recent daytime television history. Others claimed it highlighted growing concerns about how celebrity interviews sometimes prioritize viral drama over respect. Neither Kelly nor Chris immediately released official statements, but days later, sources close to both stars suggested there was no long-term hatred between them, only frustration, misunderstanding, and a moment that spiraled far beyond what anyone expected. For many viewers, the incident became bigger than just a celebrity disagreement. It sparked conversations about privacy, emotional boundaries, and the pressure television hosts face to create unforgettable moments. And while the cameras eventually stopped rolling, fans continued debating one question long afterward. Did the interview accidentally go too far? Or was the walk-off the only way for Chris to take back control of his own story?